All right, so connections looking good. All right, so we back again. Let me get my vocals in. All right, hold on. There we go. So we back live again. If y'all hear like the furnace, the washing machine, people walking upstairs, all that's what's going on. So anyway, this is my 12-step commentary on trauma and addiction. The role that trauma has to play with addiction, in the addiction. And I'm going to say, I want to call it addiction like the addiction process. Because a lot of times when I'm listening to people talk, and even myself, I would use using drugs, alcohol, promiscuous sexual activity, food, gambling, drama. I tend to think that that's addiction. You know, the using, that's addiction, and that's it. Well, if that was the case, if that was really the case, a lot of people that have been clean for a year would from the use of drugs, from the use of alcohol. And when I say the use of drugs, I also mean the selling of drugs too, because that is an addiction. The selling of alcohol, that's also an addiction. Food, the eating of food, you know, where to the point where you become unhealthy and obese. What is it? Gambling. We have more like gambling. You know, when you gamble your life away, your life savings, your home, your car, your family leave you. Promiscuous sexual activity, where you just caught in the grip of sex. You know, you not having sex for the purpose of procreation, or even the joy of sex. You know, sex can be a joyful and happy thing. But now the individual is at the point where they're in abusive sex. They having multiple sex partners. That's one example. Or they can have, you know, sex with animals, and the list goes on and on and on. You could be addicted to what? Drama. You know, just got to be in some stuff. Got to be in some stuff all the time. So, backing up and not losing the topic, what has trauma to do with addiction? And so that's where I've been at for my past couple videos. And like I said, and like I've always stated, why am I doing these videos? Or the reason why that I'm doing these videos is because myself, I'm going somewhere with this. You know, there's a saying in the 12-step fellowships, a couple of the 12-step fellowships. And that saying is, we only keep what we have by what? By giving it away. And also, should you want to attain more, then you should release or empty your cup out so that you may obtain more. And giving it and giving away what you know is a part of that. So anyway, we're gonna jump into this commentary here on trauma, and this is the third installment. Today's date is 11/27/2020. It is about 11:47 at night. And so I'm gonna get a little comfortable here. Make sure I got my coffee. I got my coffee and it's still warm. Oh yeah, that's a good one. You know, I only drink coffee on the weekend because I work on the weekday. So I'm kind of like rewarding myself. So now I've been preparing for this for a while. So we're going to jump. I'm going to make sure I got my notes handy. And sure I do. I got some notes right there. And I got my other notebook here in case I need that. And what I'm going to do is I am going to do a and I have to remember to keep my voice close to my microphone, right? So I'm going to do a little recap. And I'm going to go over what is trauma. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to go a recap for those who might be just tuning in to my video for the first time. You know, and like I stated before, you know, trauma is what I believe as a recovering person or a person that's been in the recovery process for 34 years, you know, it's something that brought the individual into the process of using. Something brought them there. It was something that made sense in their mind to use those drugs, those alcohol, that sex, eating that food, that gambling, that addicted, being addicted to drama. Something happened. A person didn't just wake up one morning and say, you know, I'm just going to ruin my life. For most people, that didn't happen. Now, some of y'all it did. Some of y'all woke up one morning and said, I'm going to be a gangster. I'm going to be a drug dealer. You said that. Sure it did. But most people didn't. A lot of people didn't. There was something that happened in their lives. There was an event that happened in their lives that affected them on 4 levels: mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. There was an event that happened. There was something that happened that had made them fearful of their life, or it had such an impact on their life that it sent them into a depressional state. It caused a lot of fear in their life, and you know it made them make the individual fearful or fear their life. You know, and it's called trauma. You know, a simple definition of trauma is, and let me get my other set of notes out. Hold up, I think I got them right here. Yeah. So one definition of trauma is, and let me get my note right here. Flip on my note, my little notepad. It says where trauma is when the individual becomes exposed to something that causes fear or anxiety in their life. You know, they could have been, you know, molested, or they could have been raped, or they could have saw a murder, or they could have grown up in a situation where there was a lot of domestic violence going on. So let me back up and talk about the 4 levels of trauma. And there's 4 levels of trauma. And the one I just spoke of, acute trauma, that's when the person has a one-time incident of a life-changing experience in their life. And I gave some examples. You know, they could be bullied at school, you know, or bullied in a home. And then the next one is chronic. It's called chronic trauma. And with chronic trauma is very simply, it's that when the individual have one incident but it's reoccurring and it could be the examples that I just mentioned, domestic violence or a neighborhood that's very, very violent, or spousal abuse, bullying, of course, molestation and rape, And I'm bringing these up because these are very common. And understand, too, that rape don't always happen to a woman. It can happen to a man, too. It can also happen to a teenager. It can also happen to a young boy. Because remember, rape is non-consensual sex, or when a person is not in a position to say yes or no. They could be locked up in jail, or they could be a child, And then the next one is complex trauma. And with complex trauma, there's there's two or more events of trauma happening in a person's life at the same time, two or more. So an example is, let's say a person was molested. Then in their neighborhood, they live in a very violent neighborhood. And then in their house, it's very unstable. It could be domestic issues going on there. So the individual is experiencing all three things at the same time. This is called complex trauma. Now, there's another type of trauma, and it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's when trauma happens to a minor. That's it. Any of these levels of trauma that happens to a minor, that's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now there's a thing called vicarious disorder. And this is the type of stress where a person have had a stressful event of one of the ones I just mentioned, acute, chronic, complex PTSD. Now what happens is, as a result of the trauma, the person uses avoidance tactics. For, let's say, in their house, where it's unstable. Well, what happens with them is, in that situation, they will use a lot of avoidance tactics. They will try to stay out the way of whatever's going on in that house. In the neighborhood, they will avoid certain spots or certain places. They just won't go. They won't go to the playground. They take different or alternate routes to school. Certain people that they don't play with, because they don't want to experience that experience of trauma that they've experienced before, or recently experienced. So with vicarious trauma is mainly using avoidance tactics. So what trauma does, and here's its relationship to addiction. Trauma affects an individual in 4 areas: mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to define those four makeups of the human being in the recovery sense. So when I talk about mental, when I bring up mental, all I'm referring to is the individual's thinking or their thought process. It has nothing to do with IQ and how smart you are. Nothing at all. The next one is the emotional. When I'm speaking of emotions or emotional, what I'm referring to, until I make it plain differently, that the individual the emotional is connected to a person's devotional part to the addiction or of the addiction. This is what I'm referring to. And then when I talk about the spiritual part of the addiction, what I'm basically talking about is what? I'm talking about the energy, not your religion, not your philosophical belief, or this type. I'm merely talking about energy. That's all I'm talking about, unless I otherwise say so. And it's going to make sense as we go along, or unless you heard some of my videos, you understand why I'm using these definitions or bringing light to these definitions. So moving on. So what happens with like I said, with the trauma affects the individual in all 4 areas. In all 4 areas have a shock has taken place, and the shock is called trauma or the traumatic experience. And what happens is mentally and emotionally, pain sets in. There's a type of pain that sets in. And this pain sets in inside the thinking. Like every time they might think about what happened. So that's that mental pain. So it's safe to say that the individual is suffering a type of mental illness. Mental illness has been set in or introduced or taken or have taken that individual to another level if they've been quote unquote diagnosed with mental illness already. And then on the next one is emotional. And what happens in the emotional sense is that emotionally they have become what? Retarded. Just as in the mental aspect. So this pain has taken place with the individual, and so there's 2 areas that have been affected. That have been affected, and retardation and mental illness have set in. On the next one is the spiritual side. On the spiritual side, energetically, the individual has become retarded also. There's a, and I say retarded, but at the same time, I like to say more so underdevelopment is occurring. Now, energetically, maybe the person have become, they may still like play basketball or sports or whatever they do well. But energetically, they have gone aloof. There's a certain part of them that they hold back on and don't connect with the real world. And what's happening in the physical part, now let me back up. On the spiritual side, it'll be very hard for them to connect with others. They will be hard to connect with others because of trust. But I'm gonna move into that later. I'm really trying to paint a picture here. So energetically, they will. They could become overachievers. They could become underachievers. They could be somewhere in the middle of an overachiever and an underachiever as a result of the pain on those 4 levels that I'm talking about. Now, at some point, what happens is with the individual is the pain, and this pain will be centered around resentment, anger, fear, shame, and guilt. Now, what happens is when this traumas have taken place, and depending on the type of trauma that it is, the individual will begin to feel what they call these days some type of way. They will begin to feel some type of way. And this some type of way, I define is connected to resentment, anger, and fear. Now, we're going on a process. This is a process, and a lot of times it's not happening all at one time, but it's a very consistent process in the progression of the disease of addiction. Now, scientifically, you know, and every now and then I pick up a scientific magazine, and what do they say about the disease of addiction? They say it's what? It's progressive. And mostly all the medical community, the recovery community, if anybody go back and do the research, overwhelmingly says this disease is what? It's progressive. And what it means by progressive is once you put the symptom down, that primary symptom, the disease is still growing. And it's growing mentally, physically, and emotionally. Excuse me, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, and it results, the results can be seen in the physical plane. So, moving on. When the individual, and so I'm gonna take a little time out to put a couple definitions after I sip my coffee. I gotta sip my coffee a little bit. So here's a sip. Oh man, that's good. So anyway, the individual begins to experience pain. In other words, pain begins to surface. And it's surfacing through shame, guilt, anger, resentment. Now, when the person is angry, they're angry about something that's happening in the here and now. And inside the here and now, I'm going to say anywhere between the present and let's say around 90 days back. That's anger. That's anger. Now, resentment is anger. However, it's anger that's surfaced 90 days, 3 months ago, and it don't have to be exactly, to all the way far back when the person can remember, and that'll be based on their age. So, for example, I'm 66. My resentment could have started back, and my birthday is in August. So my resentment could, if I have a resentment, it could start or surfaced, let's say back in March. Back in March it surfaced. But I could also be carrying resentment from 1966. I could be carrying a resentment from 1959. You know. So this is what a resentment is. It's just a past anger that I relive mentally in my mind in the here and now. And then there's fear. And fear is exactly what it is. And going back to to what word was that I used? I'm back in my notes right now. Precarious. That word, precarious. So I could have some fear, that's backed up. I remember when I was growing up, I had a friend, one of my friends. They was afraid of everything. I mean, everything. And I couldn't understand. I said, why is this person always afraid? Every time like we'd be out, we could be walking around or driving around, and this person, man, I'm telling you, they were like, oh no, I ain't going over there, and what is they doing? And it's like, man, I can see, question something, but this person questioned everything. And then some 20 years later, I kind of understood because certain things came out about the individual. And I was like, oh, okay. I see what's going on now. So anyway, going back to the resentment, anger, fear, and then shame and guilt. Shame and guilt, which is really attached to the latter three, but I decided to bring them out into the forefront because there were certain things that I wanted to make a connection with. Because remember, I'm going somewhere with this trauma, and I'm showing how trauma is directly related to the disease of addiction with and without the symptom, the primary symptom, right? And so moving on, flipping my little page over here, what happens is that being said, talked about the trauma, the different types of trauma. What happens with the individual is the feelings start surfing, the resentment, the anger, and the fear, shame, and the guilt. At some point, the individual begins to what? Medicate themselves. And how they medicate themselves, for some people, it could be drugs. They might start, smoking a little weed, taking some pills, drinking, or it could be the food thing. They start overeating or just eating to stuff a void. Because what happens is that a void is created when the trauma is at a certain point. And what I believe is this, is once a person starts becoming conscious of the effects of their trauma, a void kicks in. Once the shame, the guilt, the resentment, the anger, and the fear have moved up to the person's conscious or comes into their consciousness. This is what I believe. So the food, the sex, the gambling, the drugs, and all this could start off very, very innocently. Person, they could be like, they just, drank a few beers and, smoke a little weed and, or they might just like start off eating or something like that. And for the vicarious part of them, they could like, stay at home, watch TV, and I'm gonna stay at home, like they could be in college, for example. So let's say, for example, you got a college student. College student, they don't want to hang with they want to just like stay at home on the weekend, eat Pizza Hut, drink on their own. They might drink with a few friends, but this is a part of vicarious trauma in some cases. So or vicarious secondary behavior. So anyway, man, moving on, and we're gonna work with this. So what happens is, now that the individual they're eating or they're having sex, whole lot of it, or they're like smoking weed, drinking, gambling, anything that'll make them what? Feel good. And that goes back to what? To the spiritual side. Their spirit is being affected. Mentally, they mentally and emotionally, they become what? Obsessed and compulsive, because what's happening in the physical area, what's beginning to materialize is the addiction. Is another phase. They're into a whole nother phase of the addiction. And guess what? They may not even know it. Nah, they may not even know it. Well, I don't like to go out on the weekends. I like, staying in the house. I'm a homebody. Y'all go out and y'all do whatever. I'm just gonna eat me a pizza, an extra large pizza with everything on it. With some chicken fingers on the side and some breadsticks with some cheese, with a couple Mountain Dews. Matter of fact, I'm gonna order 2 of them, so when you get back, you'll have some too. So I'm having 2 extra large pizza meat lovers with some breadsticks. Then when you get home, right, they done ate up a whole pizza and a half. And you like, damn, I thought you was gonna, homie, I thought you was gonna, or they could get their little weed or drinking or whatever it is and isolate themselves. Or they could be the one that go out and eat up all the food and smoke up all the smoke and drink up all the drink and pass the fuck out. And you be the one taking them home and they don't know what happened. They don't know what happened. They done throw it up all over the place. And they might even call it having the fun. But what's happening on a deeper level is the effects of the trauma is beginning to surface. And the pain is becoming apparent on all 4 levels. And then the individual is beginning to what? Self-medicate. And then they have another system that's going on, and it's called denial. And let me flip over to my notes. All right, yeah, and it's called denial. And inside the denial process, what's happening is, and I got some notes on that. I got some notes on that one. So what's happening inside the denial process is what's happening is first let me define denial. Let me go back, and I just want to put a definition out, put some definitions out there that I've researched concerning denial. So inside the denial, denial is one. The process is the beginning of the process to the advancement to actually denial is just simple rejecting reality and apparent reality. And that's called simple denial. I call that simple denial. It's to refuse to admit to the truth or reality of something, such as a statement, charge, or a reality. That's simple denial. Now it's complex denial. There's another thing called complex denial. I call it complex denial, but it's denial as a system. And then this type of denial is more complicated because remember a while back ago when I talked about the makeup of the human being, the mental, emotional, the spiritual, and the physical. Well, denial is connected to all 4. Denial is connected to the mental, to the thinking, where the person actually rationalize their denial. They actually rationalize their refusal to admit the truth or the reality about something, their own reality, and that's what they use. They'll actually come up with what if only. They actually have certain inside the denial system. They will use it to what? Keep focus off of them. You can hear there is a word called plausibility. And what plausibility is basically is telling a lie, but it sounds truthful. And let me give you a good example. Here's a good example. So let's say you had to be to work at 8 o'clock and you showed up at 9. So the boss said, hey, Mr. Jones, well, what happened? Well, well, why are you late? And they say, oh, sir, I woke up this morning, I had a flat tire. Now, that's very, very believable. But what they may have left out was they saw that flat tire last night and just said, forget it, I'll deal with it tomorrow. So they woke up with the flat tire, but they knew about it last night. Yeah. They knew about it last night. Or here's one. Well, my alarm clock didn't go off. That's believable. But it goes to the fact that you didn't set that alarm clock. You didn't set your alarm clock. So plausibility is a lie that's believable that the individual tell themselves. So inside the denial system, the individual has a lot of resources. Smoke screening, another technique. Now here's smoke screening. Is when you challenge me on my behavior, you say, you know what? You ate a whole extra large pizza and a half. What happened? And I say, well, y'all eat like that too. Y'all did the same thing last week. Well, we ain't talking about last week. We talking about what's happening right now. So smoke screening is when it's basically being what? Evasive. Taking a evasive action, evasive stance on a situation that's real. And this is what addicts do. They're never forthright coming. I'm telling you, man, the denial system as a system, that's the one that frustrates a person so much, they just, you just want to smack them. So, and it's more to come, smoke screening, lying, deceitfulness, being very